four, three. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you as we talk about Venezuela. What is going on there and why are we striking their boats? Why have we authorized the CIA, who operate covertly, to operate overtly there? What's really going on? And they've been brought into sharper focus because the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize is the leader of the opposition in Venezuela. Of course, we remember President Chavez, who walked into the UN and said he could smell the sulfur after President Bush spoke. Bless his heart. But laughing aside, he was a great revolutionary in the tradition of those who sought to get the vast resources of their country back to the people. He sought to eradicate poverty and to educate the populace. And of course, even to get the baseball players, a vast number of our professional baseball players in the United States are from Venezuela. And the owners of the teams did not like him because he said, even if you bring my players, my countrymen, my sons to the United States, you must pay them a modicum of money. And they were furious. They said, well, wait a minute. We're just going to bring them on a farm team. He said, no, you're bringing them out the country. He did a lot of things that really rubbed imperialists the wrong way. And President Maduro is in that tradition. No government is perfect. And I don't think we should even have that caveat because people are imperfect. But he was his vice president. And for some reason, he has inflamed the passions of imperialists. Why? What is going on here? We need to talk about that. And we need to look at the racism that is underneath all of this. That is the rub. Something that no one talks about. How many of us remember when Mariah Carey came on the scene and she said, my father is Black, but he's Venezuelan? Remember, more Black people were sent to South and Central America than were brought to the United States, what became the United States and what became Canada. So when you go to South and Central America, you will blend. Trust me. So I want you to think about that. And of course, Abraham, one of our faithful listeners, is from Venezuela and he checks in every day. I cannot wait to see him. Listen to this great man. He is really a Renaissance man, a tremendous academic, he is a man of culture. He is a man of great political thought. And indeed, he is the former secretary. I have to look at this. Former assistant secretary for education and public service at the Smithsonian. But if you look at the cultural landscape, if you look at the political landscape, James Early is there. Indeed, I was smiling. He brought some smiles to me as we talked about Jack Odell, one of the great unsung heroes of the civil rights movement, one of his colleagues and friends, someone who mentored all of us. Indeed, he was of such consequence that President John F. Kennedy asked, that was a slip, I guess. He asked Dr. King, he said, look, given his political ties, I need you to let him go. I need you to let Stan Levinson go. He said, well, okay, for the sake of the movement, so we will not be smeared as communist or socialist. I will do that. And he reemerged. He kept working in the civil rights movement, but he reemerged in the 70s because Reverend Jesse Jackson hired him to be the first director. In fact, he was the architect of his international policies. And he created the international arm of Operation Push, of the rainbow of Reverend Jackson's presidential campaigns, and indeed of the civil rights movement in the modern era. He was the person who pushed on Palestine, who pushed us to really reach out to the Caribbean and to South and Central America, to Asia, to Africa, to have another kind of relationship with the freedom fighters in Europe. What a man, and what a man James Early. When I wanted to dig down into this particular topic, I said, I've got to call him because now that we have this Nobel Prize winner who has called on the United States and Israel to come and rescue the people of Venezuela, I said, oh, there are very, very few people who could explain what is going on here and the racism driving so much of this. James Early, welcome to the show. I'm so honored to have you with us today. It was so hard for me to distill. I had to ask you just before we came on the air, help me to distill your title because you've done so much, so much. And just on behalf of generations yet unborn, I thank you for all of your work down through the years. So let's get to Venezuela. What is happening there?
First of all, it's such a pleasure to be back with you and to hear the context and particularly setting it about our dear friend Jack Odell and his relationship to both Dr. King and his relationship to your father and all of the great work that Reverend Jesse Jackson has done with working class people in the rainbow. I think it's very important through the African American experience, the Black experience, the particularities of our realities. Uh, Concentrated among others in Reverend Jackson, able then to reach out and show that out of this particularity comes a human circumstance that white people in Appalachia, white trade unionists, Latinos, others joined in, and this is a key to the role of African Americans in the development of this republic and certainly the work of Reverend Jackson and the work of Jack Odell, yourself, and others. So I'm pleased to be here. What is happening in Venezuela? Let me set a broader context because we're living in unprecedented times, and I think we have to draw on the analytics of our scholar activists who foreshadowed this in their analysis. In 1903, when W.E. Du Bois said that the color line was the major problem of the 20th century, in 1953, he revised that to say that he still believed then in 53, as he did before, that the color line was a major problem, but he had come to understand that something else was involved that both motivated and obscured it at the same time. And that was the fact that a small number of people are willing to live in luxury through their greed, their expansive power.
Okay, hold on. We just went out again, but we're going to get Mr. Early back. Okay, through their greed, you can pick up from
Through their
there.
greed, and that in order to preserve this social relationship of extravagance and class, racialized, they were willing to go to war. Invariably, what is happening in Venezuela in many ways, much of what is happening in Chicago through the fascism and authoritarianism, attacking Black people, attacking vulnerable people. And so Venezuela then is an extension of what has been going on under the Monroe Doctrine since 1823, when the United States declared that the Americas and the Caribbean were its purview and that Europe should not intervene and that the U.S. would dominate. At the beginning of the 21st century, Hugo Chavez, who defined himself both as a mestizo, Spanish and Indian, but also his grandmother was Black, and he says, I am an Afro descendant. Look at this nose, look at these lips, look at this curly hair. He was very explicit. He welcomed your father in 2005. I'm reminded in a recent conversation with Jesus Sucho Garcia, the father of Afro epistemology, an Afro Venezuelan who is the ambassador now in Benin and Senegal and other parts of West Africa, that I was actually there in 2005 with your father when he visited Barlovento after one of the white American ministers had called for the assassination of Hugo Chavez, and your father spoke out, and he talked about the impact, not of the personality of Chavez, but the policies, the governance policies that gave access to Afro descendants, indigenous people, marginalized women, and children. Venezuela is the world's largest depository of oil. That is a principal issue of what is happening in Venezuela that the U.S. wants to control.
Well, could please say that one more time. I want everyone to hear
Okay.
that.
Venezuela has the largest known repository of oil in the world. People need to look back in history. Venezuela is the one that initiated the Organization of Petroleum Countries, OPEC. That is lost in the context now of looking at the significance of the Middle East. And it is that oil that has really attracted the interest of imperial interests here in the U.S. Now, under the Obama administration, we have to go back in history. They declared Venezuela a particular threat to the security of the U.S. That set the table for subsequent presidents, Donald Trump. Donald Trump, in his first administration, tried to invade Venezuela 2 times against Chavez and was defeated. And now they have a $50 million uh, bonus for who would assassinate Maduro. So what we're seeing going on in Venezuela is the same thing we're seeing going on in Chicago and Washington. We're seeing going on in Gaza against the Palestinians. It is raw, vulgar power for the interest of corporations to take over that oil. Who will suffer most? As Du Bois had pointed out, invariably this has an unusual, extraordinary impact on people of color, so that the indigenous community and Afro-Venezuelans, women and children in rural and marginalized areas will suffer most from the threats that are going on against Venezuela now, the economic warfare that's been going on that has forced out several million Venezuelans into places like Colombia and throughout Latin America, and many who came to the U.S. These extrajudicial policies and assassinations always have a racialized impact. Now, if you go online, it will say that there are over 1 million Afro-Venezuelans, and it will say something like 60% of Venezuelans identify as having some African descent blood. But in talking to Jesus Chucho Garcia, again, the ambassador currently in West Africa for Venezuela, Afro-Venezuelan, he points out that the last census said that there were 6 million Afro-Venezuelans, which constitute 51% of the population. Now, race is a social construction, so that the issue of color is a qualitative factor in here. However one looks at those statistics, the color line is a very important one for us, the African American community, and particularly here in the U.S. to consider. But for any people who embrace humanity, who stand against these crude, vulgar plagues of violence and this inhumanity that we're seeing going on, killing 24 people on these small boats coming into the Caribbean, when 90% of the cocaine comes from the Pacific coast, coming out of Asia, Colombia, and other places, not through the Caribbean. So these extrajudicial killings are another violation of liberal democracy, which we are also seeing in Chicago, attacking poor housing projects where mostly Black and Latinos live, pulling children out into the night, throwing women to the ground. So these are unusual times. What are the implications then for us? For the African American community, we must recognize that we still have the same racialized interest, and that this racist attack is the front door to go horizontal. We're seeing the attack at the Smithsonian Institution against its 20 museum complex, principally the African American Museum, but then to go lateral against the Latino Museum, against the Women Museum, against LGBTQ exhibitions. So this racialized attack of the Trump MAGA administration, and I think we have to be clear that Trump is the instrument of something of our fellow Americans across the nation who control state houses, who control local judiciaries, who control the Supreme Court. He was happenstance for these focused multi-decade preparation to retake America, to resegregate America, this white supremacy that is now blatantly open, this fundamental Christianism, misogyny with women in the kitchen. Women are second class, including elite class white women. This is what is going on. And we have to ask ourselves then, where is our defense, not just our resistance? Resistance is a very romantic term, but where is our defense of the accumulated gains of democracy since the time of slavery? in which the presidents of African American struggles legally have opened up the mirror of democracy for all other groups to say, me too, I'm missing full access to democracy. Whether it was in the centric studies led by Afro-American studies that opened up Chicano studies, Puerto Rican studies, women's studies, gay studies, whether it was a second iteration of the women's movement, which the civil rights movement catalyzed and opened up. We are the crucible, we are the test case. And so we have to stand up not only in defense against what's going on against us here in the United States and what's going on against other citizens in the United States. Our extended family, a daughter that we've known since she was in utero, 1,000% Jewish, Mara Finkelstein, the first professor, full professor to be fired from her job for anti-Semitism because she stands up for the rights of Palestinians and against the occupation, the constitutional apartheid law in which over 50%, 56, 57%, if not larger, of Israelis want Palestinians out of their homeland. This is not just a Netanyahu question.
Mhm.
So, because these are unprecedented times, we have to ask ourselves, in addition to our spontaneous reaction, the heroic reaction of the citizens of Chicago and elected officials in Chicago to stand against ICE and what we see going on in Oregon and the legal cases that are contesting and confronting this MAGA Trump authoritarianism, we have to ask ourselves, where are our members leading the Democratic parties? Jeffries, who is tied up with AIPAC, uh, Cory Booker, who's tied up with AIPAC. Where is Congressman Meeks, who is the foreign policy director minority under the Democratic Party? They need to stand out on not only what's going on in the US, but what's going on in Venezuela, because it will impact Afro descendants who have historically looked to us here in the United States. We have been in the 20th century and into the 21st century the test case for possibilities for African descendants all over this hemisphere.
Well,
That is
hold that thought. Why why has the African world looked here and the world, the diasporic world? Why have they looked to African Americans in particular? I see that with Nkrumah. I see that with all of these, with the freedom fighters. You saw that with Mandela. You saw that with Bozak. I mean, you saw that with people who were looking for freedom. They said, we looked to you. Why?
we live in the most powerful
Okay.
economic because we live in the most powerful economic and militarized country in the entire world, and we suffered hundreds of years of enslavement. And against that, we were able to make democracy a living construct, the demos, the ordinary people, the cross-share, the power of ordinary people. Black power, as I said, set the juridical precedent for opening so many visions of democracy of other marginalized people here in the US who have used those legal precedents, who have used the way that we organize, our spirituality that your father has been so much involved in with ordinary African Americans who organized in the South, who called Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King didn't just appear out of the blue to be the leader. He was an expression of the request of ordinary people who were already organized. So other people in the colonized world, as Du Bois pointed out in 1903, he was speaking to people on the continent of Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean Sea. He was speaking to colonialism, and these were people in Africa and Asia, Indonesia, and the Philippines, and so forth and so on, who were under European white supremacy colonization. So they have looked at our example in this nation, which enslaved us for hundreds of years, and to see here are examples. The United States is a big amplifier of possibilities, both in its constitutional rhetoric, and I want to underscore that it was rhetoric because they were not my founding fathers. But a thread of truth should not be dismissed simply because the whole cloth is tattered. The whole cloth of the people who put that Constitution together was tattered. But there are threads of elements that stand independent of the slave owners who actually wrote it. And we as African Americans took those threads and began to repair that tattered piece of cloth called the Constitution and to make it a more viable and living proposition. This is why people have looked to our examples. And now we need to stand up again as an example in the foreign policy arena. This percentage politics that so many African American politicians saying, well, I'm in Congress for the Black community. No, you're in Congress for the Black community and for all of humanity in the United States. And you must also stand on the foreign policy. Dr. King was told, shut your mouth and go back and talk about the Negro. You have no business in the international arena. He and Jack Odell defied that. Your father and Jack Odell defied that and said the inhumanity going on in the United States, the exploitation, the oppression, is tied to a global system in which the United States plays a huge validating role, not only in the control of capitalist economics around the globe, but of mass media, of Hollywood, which have been consciously instrumentalized to say that you around the world should be a reflection of the class and race and gender propositions here in the United States. So we stand against foreign policy that aids women's health with regard to preventing unwanted pregnancies. We stand against Islam in our State Department, saying that we are protecting Christians as Africans said, you know, they arrived, we had the land, they had the Bible, we turned around, they had the land and we had the Bible. So the U.S. plays still a very important role, and African Americans must see ourselves as a catalytic element, not only for the maintenance of democracy and the gains that we have made here in the United States, but also for the issues internationally. And Venezuela is now on the front burner. With Trump, once again, they tried twice against Maduro. We must hold President Obama accountable. He needs to step forward now and rectify that perspective. We all make errors. We all make conscious decisions that are not good, but it does not mean that we should be inevitably tagged with that, but only if we stand forth. So we need these Black voices now to stand forth and to protect our cultural racialized brothering and sisters in Venezuela, but also to help protect all Venezuelans. And we should talk about Maduro at some point.
And we should talk about Maduro, but
Okay.
let's go to Chavez and his role, because I think that the fact that he did tie himself to Black people in Brazil, which elevated Brazil, which also helped Lula in Brazil. I mean, it helped,
Yes.
excuse me, in Venezuela. He
Yeah.
did that in Venezuela, but it helped Lula, and Reverend
Yes.
campaigned for him as well, because there's been an awakening of Black consciousness. We see it in Colombia, in South and Central America. You know, we've wanted colorism as a very real thing. We've wanted to white
Yes.
line, but there now there is an awakening. There is a wait a minute. We are Black people, and we are proud of it. We're proud of our Black heritage. So where does Chavez and then Maduro fit in that? Because just with so much that is going on, Mr. Early, many of us, many African Americans, and many people who are anti imperialists will say, okay, my plate is full. Or should I say, what does Venezuela really have to do with me? Why? And because, plus, Maduro he doesn't look like he's Black. You know, I mean, because you will hear that. I'm just giving you what people have
Right.
said. I'm like,
Right.
I really don't think you understand how they identify with us, how they look at us. When we've had the gas shortages, they wanted to, Chavez wanted to give the gas to us. You know, he said, no, 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 no. I want to help Black people out, you know.
Yes.
So help me to understand that so that the audience can understand how they identify, how they see themselves, and how they see us.
Well, Chavez came from a poor rural background. He wanted to be a professional baseball player, and he entered the military as a way of upward mobility. We are familiar with that story.
Mhm.
Can't get access to education, can't find a job, join the military, get a paycheck, get a roof over your head, a meal. Uh, and then he began to identify with the most marginalized. And he came to the point in 2003, I think it was, when Danny Glover, who was then president of the Trans-Africa Forum, Bill
Mhm.
Fletcher was head of the Trans-Africa Forum, Julianne Malveaux, Sylvia Hill, and a number of people on that board. I was not on the board, but Danny Glover, my dear brother, insisted that I come with him because it turned out I was the only Spanish speaker of this 15, 20 person delegation. And then when we went to, after 2 days there, we went to visit with Chavez for dinner, and he said, let's talk for a while. We went into a room. He spoke for about an hour with no notes about Haiti and the debt owed to Haiti. After about 3 minutes, I turned to Danny Glover. I said, you know, they've been portraying this guy in the media as a clown and all of this. He has a brilliant mind because he
Mhm.
understood that the plan of Bolivar to liberate Latin America from Spanish colonialism, and Bolivar liberated what is now Panama, which was split off by the
Mhm.
U.S. from Colombia, Peru, the greater Latin America. But in order to do that, Bolivar went to Haiti to speak to these enslaved Africans who had beat Napoleon and taken over Haiti and freed the country of slavery. And he asked for men and boats. And they asked, what do you do about slavery? And Bolivar said, I will abolish slavery. He goes back to Venezuela and he starts a revolution. He's defeated. Chavez could name people who Haitians who were hanged, where they were hanged. When Bolivar had to leave the country again, where did he go? He went to Jamaica, the famous letter from Jamaica, another Afro descendant dominant population where he got solidarity. Chavez understood that and wanted to live that out, not as a historical factor, but as a contemporary factor and related to Haiti. And he said to Danny Glover, you should start Trans-Africa forums here. And we pointed out to him he already had the Afro-Venezuela Network, which now Ambassador Jesus Chucho Garcia was one of the leading founders of. And in that meeting, Chavez said, I am a mestizo, Indian and Spanish, but my grandmother was una negra. She was a black woman. 3 months later, he's at the UN on National Public Radio or Democracy Now, I forget which, and he says, you see these big lips? You see this curly hair? This is Mother Africa. Uh,
Mhm.
and he meant that as an identity question. He didn't stop being a mestizo,
Mhm.
but he recognized and stepped forward and claimed his. He claimed he provided
Okay, hold on. We're going to get you back. Hold on. Okay, I got you back.
how Chavez not
But
only claimed his Afro descent heritage, he claimed solidarity with African Americans by providing oil in the winter for
Mhm.
community, African American communities in particular, who needed heating. Uh, opened up many universities on the continent of Africa and Africa as his ambassadors there. His future former ambassador in Angola, a number of other countries, and now he's in Benin and Senegal and a couple of other countries in West Africa as one example. So Chavez opened up so also a new breadth of possibilities in Latin America during that early point. You mentioned Lula. Lula is a white of skin, but one might say in his ways of knowing and doing as he was socialized, he knows the depths of Black poverty because he came out of abject poverty in
Mhm.
a white community. And some will remember he went to the Davos with these elite white men from all over the world who run the global economy.
Mhm.
And he says, you white men, they are looking down at this young white guy. But he was speaking out of the particularity of the African and African descendant culture and history and life ways. He was speaking about a universal proposition. We need to step forward for all humanity. Brazil is about 53% Afro descendant, according to self identification in the national elections. And so these are the fundamental democratic questions across Latin America, which are highly racialized. They're also highly genderized. We must remember that we just can't speak in abstract about Black people because there is the issue of Black chauvinism, of Black
Mhm.
men vis a vis black women. And so while we speak about our black culture, our black race, we have to also look at the internal sociology and what contradictions we perpetuate. And this is again where our elected leaders at the federal front are not stepping forward. And again, I want to call attention to Congressman Meeks, who is the Foreign Affairs in the Democratic Party, to Jeffries, who on the House side heads the Democratic Party. Where are their voices? We have to demand Cory Booker. Where is Reverend Warnock, the Martin Luther King church leader, Senator Reverend Warnock, uh, who can't say at one point couldn't say ceasefire. And this is not personalizing this. These are probably very nice people, but this is a question of governance policy. We're not electing friends, and we're not electing people. We should not be electing people simply because they share the same color, the same gender. But what is their governance policy? And we need to leverage them as active citizens to step forward on the question of Venezuela and on the question of Cuba.
And let me ask you that, because I think that people need to understand what the persons you mentioned, the persons you mentioned, what they represent all over the world. Um, Adam Clayton Powell did not just represent Harlem, and he knew that. He knew that he was representing all of Black America, and he behaved that way. And he reached out to the world. And I think that when you really have an understanding of the world, and as you explained, uh, the role of the Black freedom fighter, let me be very specific about that, in it, because some Black people wanted to stay on the plantation, like some white Americans wanted to remain in the British Empire, right? So I get it. I'm not with it, but I understand it. So help me to understand how we are to uh, just going forward. Who then is Maduro? Because he is not Chavez, but he was his vice president,
Right.
and he was someone who President Chavez, I do know that he did trust. And so the concern was when President Chavez died that he would not be up to the task. And I think he's proved himself to be up to the task. It's not easy, but he is, everybody wants the oil. Let's
Yes.
get right to it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yes. So again, I think we need to step back for a moment, take a larger context. The history of human beings produces on the right wing side of the human meter some extraordinarily problematic people, Hitler, Mussolini, Margaret Thatcher. And on the other side of the human meter, Mandela, Jesse Jackson, Reverend King. What's our sister? I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Fannie Lou Hamer. I,
Fanny
I would
Lou
say
Hamer.
I would say
Uh,
a Jack Odell, a James
Jack,
Early.
yes,
I
and
did,
and and
yeah.
and our Fidel Castro
Mhm.
are a Hugo Chavez. Hugo
Yeah.
Chavez was one of those extraordinary people, and so there is a drop off, particularly when we personalize politics rather than look at what his governance policies was. We are really caught up with the fascinating personality, the engaging, organic intellectual he was. I arranged for Harry Belafonte to go to Venezuela after I'd gone with Danny Glover and others. Belafonte put together his own delegation, but I had set up the meeting. And Cornel West was one of the people there. And informally, when Hugo Chavez saw Cornel West, and there's film of this, they were talking about Socrates and Jesus Christ. Chavez could talk to you about anything because he was an incessant reader.
Mhm.
But he probably over individualized his attempt to be a social humanitarian, and he was late in putting together a party. Uh, and
Mm.
when he became very ill, Danny Glover and I were there with him at the ballot box on the last time he voted, and I was there now. I think maybe 12 years, if not 13 years ago, the anniversary of his death. He turned to his vice president, who was a trade unionist, who was probably of mixed race. But again, the real question is he and Chavez shared the same humanity of working with the most marginalized people, of building power in communities, of self-determination, of communities making their own decisions, and trying to force national elected officials to be public servants, not vertical leaders, but horizontally, socially engaged civil public servants working with and collaborating with people to make their own decisions, taking the responsibility of having a panoramic view of the diversity of the nation, but not trying to determine one size fits all. So there was a huge drop off in personality, if you will, and in circumstances. When Chavez came in, he catalyzed a new motion in Latin America. We're in Ecuador, Peru, even in Argentina, and certainly in Brazil, and Mexico was always there. Saint Vincent and the Venice and the Grenadines, the emergence of Mia Moore, ambassador in Barbados, all of those dynamics of self-determination, the community of Latin American and Caribbean nations, calling Latin America and the Caribbean a zone of peace. Petrocaribe, in which he subsidized oil. Oil was $100 a barrel at that time. He took all of that extra money and put it into the most marginalized communities, put it into New York City and
Hmm.
black communities. Uh, the world context has changed, and Maduro inherited a different kind of circumstance. But now let's go to Maduro, the politician, the governance person, not just the personality. I think there are internal contradictions, internal problems, but that's a question for Venezuelans internally to resolve, not for people externally to impose. And this charlatan and the disgraceful role that the Nobel Committee has played in giving not a peacemaker, but someone who is openly hugging and calling for Netanyahu to be a part of the invasion. She went on record with Netanyahu asking him to help invade Venezuela, now calling on Trump. She dedicated her Nobel Prize to Donald Trump. That is not a peacemaker. And so the Nobel Committee should be ashamed and should be shamed and criticized by us. How do you put her up against the likes of a Martin Luther King? Even how do you put her up against the likes of an Obama? And I wouldn't put up Obama as in comparison to King, but I think we have to use our common sense here. Reverend Al Sharpton went on to say how glad he was that Trump didn't get it, but then upholding this fascist woman. And I thought, did they just give him something? Just have to
Okay, wait one moment because we lost you. Of course, we lost you after you talked. Okay, your critique, your critique was that.
So even Reverend Al Sharpton went on saying on public television, saying while he was glad that Trump didn't get the Nobel Prize, he was so pleased to see a peace person in this fashion, this woman who's calling for invasion of her own country. And so we have to hold these people accountable for the misinformation or the misjudgments, and have investigate and come back and rectify and tell us exactly what is going on. We cannot sit silently on this because the extent to which we sit silently on the U.S. potential already really invasion, the economic warfare against Venezuela, as there is economic warfare against Cuba. Uh, there is also the warfare against Black and brown communities in Chicago and Washington, D.C. The threat to move into New York City if a Muslim, Kwame Mandami, born in Kenya, he's not being voted in because he's a Muslim born in Kenya. He's being voted in for governance policies about affordability. That's why 60-some% of Jewish voters are supporting his governance policy, but they're also supporting his connection of domestic politics to international politics, saying what is going on, the slaughter, the inhumane slaughter that the United States bipartisan, both Democratic Party leadership and Republican Party leadership, supporting the occupation and supporting the ethnic cleansing and the bombing of the herding of Palestinians back and forth, saying, here's a safe space, and then they go and bomb it. Uh, they're voting to say that is not the humanity we are, that we want to be. It is not saying that they're anti-Jewish. They're saying that they're not just saying that this is about Netanyahu. They're saying that this is an apartheid, as the South Africans have called. So this is a context of thinking of looking at Maduro, the internal contradictions of Maduro. He's been criticized by the Communist Party, which does not have a lot of leverage in Venezuela. He split that party. I think some of the issues they raised about anti-worker trade union issues are substantive, but that's an internal matter for them to resolve, not for someone else to come in and dictate. And what we're happening now is with Rubio in Miami, along with the Democratic representatives in Miami who are who are pro-invasion of Venezuela, including, I'm trying to think of the name of the Democratic Party woman who headed the DNC and was thrown out because
Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Debbie Wasserman Schultz. We have to call these people into account for their support of clearly anti-democratic, vulgar racist who are about killing people. And Trump has already killed 20, he and Rubio have already killed 24 Venezuelans, and these small skiffs, these are not boats. These are little fishing things. And we've seen no evidence of drugs. We don't know who these people are. And now he's authorized the CIA to go in and to do what the Israelis have been doing, is going around the Middle East, assassinating people.
Well,
And
please
again,
wait a minute. I want you to speak to that because I think it's extraordinary. As you've said, we are in extraordinary times when he is speaking publicly about and a government operation, a government organization that is supposed to operate covertly. He is saying no overtly. This is what
yes.
I do. So I said, whoa, what does this mean? What are you guys going to do down there?
It means that we cannot presume or assume or look at any recent historical protocols. We're in a totally new, it's not that authoritarianism or fascism is coming, it's here. The question is how much of it is here. And the issue is we're still early in the electoral game, and it may not be an electoral game. Already, public people in the public space, MSNBC and groups like that are saying there may not be 2028 elections. I don't want to get into speculation, but the militarization, the dismantling of civil rights gains that Black people made that open up the society for more for Latinos, for women, for rural people. We are the catalyst. We are the test case. History has put us in this position. It does not mean we'll be here by the end of the century. The Latinization of the United States will probably change a lot of who are the catalytic forces. But up to this point, we are still a catalytic force. And the attacks, the rationalization of authoritarianism is highly racialized. What did Trump just say to the Europeans? Your culture, your civilization is being deteriorated, is being stained by immigration. Where is this immigration coming from? It is coming mostly from the historical colonial South to the North. I think on the African continent, the migration still may be principally from the North to the big economy in South Africa, although the largest economy on the African continent is in Nigeria, but perhaps the most sophisticated one is in South Africa. But they're coming from North Africa. They're coming from Africa south of the Sahara. They're dying, trying to cross the ocean daily. The news media in the U.S. is not covering this. They're stacked up outside the tunnel in London because of economic push out and the civil wars being produced by fundamentalist Islam and also by the United States and by Mossad coming out of Israel inciting this. Why? Because some of the countries in the Middle East have bought up large tracts of land in Northern Africa for food production, and then they're sending it back to the Middle East. If you go to Ethiopia and you're in the airport and you see hundreds and hundreds of women Ethiopian women lined up to get on planes to fly into the Middle East to clean toilets, to clean houses, to these are issues that our political leaders that we've been elected to protect the democracy that we've gained for ourselves and for the country are not standing up to talk about. And we have to call them out, and we have to elect new leaders. We need public servants who are going to collaborate with us, not simply represent us, and that's both domestically and internationally. So, on the question of Maduro, whatever his limitations and shortcomings, and I think they're objectively there. I know him. I've not seen him now in several years. I've spent qualitative time with him as Danny Glover and I really had a really close working relationship with Chavez, a very friendly relationship with Chavez. The first time I met him, he called me Jimmy. I hadn't been called Jimmy since I was in Tallahassee, Florida. That's what I grew up with until I was 18. But Chavez had that kind of, insightful engagement and personality. And I remember Chavez was so excited about the election of Obama, the potential election of Obama. I was in Venezuela, about 500 artists and intellectuals in defense of humanity, and he spoke to us for about 2 or 3 hours, and he came off stage and he walked directly to me with a big smile on his face, and he said to me in Spanish, "Jim, Obama is going to be elected." And I leaned over and we gave each other a big hug, and I whispered in his ear, "Yes, I think he is going to be elected and he will be in charge of empire." He stepped back and he looked at me. He says, "Yes, you're probably right." But he was very excited because he understood that a racial barrier was being broken, that a major democratic step, that Black people were electing someone that, because of the color of his skin, would not have been elected earlier, and that through the struggles of African Americans, the society was opening up, and millions of white people and brown people voted for him. As with Black Lives Matter, most of the people in the street when Black Lives Matters stood up against a televised slaughter that we saw, most of those people were white. Most of the people around the world who demonstrated around Floyd were white, but that was catalyzed by these young Black Americans, and some older who stood forth, but principally our young Black Americans. Again, we are the catalyst, we are the crucible, the test case. And with regard to Venezuela, we should stand up and protect with them their national sovereignty, their independence, their self-determination, and support them resolving their own internal matters, not through the invasion of the CIA and not through the quiet Democratic Party leadership who is saying nothing about this. Where is Jeffries on this? Where is Meeks saying, let's stop this? The same question that's being asked about a lot of internal politics as well. And I say that in terms of their public governance responsibilities. This is not a personal attack on their personhood. We didn't elect them.
You were saying that this is not an attack upon their personhood.
It's a criticism of their failed governance policies. We have to get beyond, when Clyburn stepped forward to stop the campaign of Bernie Sanders, not that Bernie Sanders was a white, elderly Jewish man. He had a governance about healthcare for all, and the that people were resonating to.
Oh, hold on, wait a minute. Tell the truth and shame the devil. You said when he stepped forward to, because Obama stepped forward to stop Bernie too. I mean, was that
yes, Obama, Hillary Clinton,
they all came together.
They all came together, but
yeah.
Clyburn in particular, because
Absolutely.
South Carolina was that transition state.
And then gave us someone who was anti-busing, and gave us someone who befriended the Confederates, gave us someone who helped to push Ed Brooke, the only Black senator at the time, out of his seat.
And who gave us Clarence Thomas.
Hello, people forget that. Mr. Early, come on.
Right. We have to remember that he stood against the call of the criticism of a Black woman.
He insulted her, tried to bury her,
yes,
and elevated him.
Yes, and then stepped forward and said, "I am a Zionist." That's what he said that publicly. I am a Zionist, and therefore I will support this constitutional apartheid, this occupation, this ethnic cleansing, this slaughter, and 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 so we have to be this is about governance policy. And with regard to the African Americans I've called out, Jeffries, who heads the House out of the Democratic Party, this is about his governance policies, which are not effective. This is about taking money from APAC. This is about not standing up for the affordability campaign that Kwame Mandami, that's his name, is running, because he does not stand with where Mandami is about Israel. This is where he's saying that the Israel question of their occupation is more important than the affordability question. Jeffries has been quiet on this. Schumer is against him. So is Trump. So is Cuomo. And Reverend Al, about 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, on his national television program, no, on Joe in the Morning or whatever that is,
Morning, Jeff.
when Morning Joe, when asked if he would be supporting Mandami, he says he's praying over it. That is unacceptable. Uh, why is he praying over it? Is he saying, I don't stand for these governance policies? Or is he saying, I don't want to get on the other side of people who want to continue supporting what is going on in Israel? It's not about him being a democratic socialist. John Conyers was a card-carrying democratic socialist. Congressman Dellums was a card-carrying democratic socialist. I would even venture to say that the policies, the governance policies of Reverend Jesse Jackson were democratic socialists. So it's not the nomenclature that it's about the policy. I would venture to say that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, in fact, he wrote that he was more socialist in his economic policies, was about harmonizing the system, getting a better balance of its production and the upper class and its limited distribution to the people who actually do the work. So this is about governance policies. And with regard to Venezuela and Maduro, we have to step forward. I'm very, very concerned. I spoke to Ambassador Jesus Chucho Garcia last night and earlier today. There are 70 military bases in the U.S. In the Latin American and Caribbean. There are 12 in Panama. There are 9 military bases in Colombia. There is Vieques, which a lot of us, including myself, fought to get the U.S. military out, as they were using that as a bombing place that they have revitalized in order to invade Venezuela. And then there is, I think, the imminent threat against Cuba as well, because Rubio doesn't just want the oil. Rubio was not born in Cuba, but he has bought fully into the right. Little Rubio, after that is the
Little Marco.
demeaning. I mean, little Marco. This is the demeaning term of Trump. Uh, these people are barbarous. They are manifestations of evil. They have no integrity. After Cruz's wife was demeaned by Trump, they all then
Hugged.
compromised with these policies, and we have to be clear on that. Clive, Congressman Clyburn, before Biden stepped down, had publicly suggested that Biden give Trump a preemption on possible going to unify the country. Now we have these racist comments coming out by the young Republicans, these anti-Semitic, homophobic comments. So our fellow Americans, many of them are fundamentally racist, and there is no unifying there. And we have to be clear that they have elected these people and that they control much of the country through the state houses across the country, the judicial across the country. We have a dictatorship of capitalists. They are in the White House, vulgarly so. They are making, I mean, I listen to 5 minutes of MSNBC every day, and even these people are stepping forward saying, look how vulgar these deals are, openly, as was Biden's son. And so it's both sides of the aisle. And I just think we as progressive African Americans, in our own interest and in the interest of our fellow citizens who are also being screwed in this process, rural white America, Um, we must ask ourselves, why are we the largest drug market? We talk about supply and demand,
Mhm.
and Trump is saying, well, we'll cut off supply, but demand is here. They're coming to the U.S. because throughout the Midwest, throughout West Virginia, and these are largely white Americans,
That's
although it
right.
is now beginning to hit Black Americans and Latinos. The fentanyl, what is going on in our society
Mhm.
that people are losing themselves, not because of the color of their skin, but because of the nature of the system, which is not producing what we basically need, like universal health care, which our sister Kamala Harris could not stand up for,
Mm.
which Biden could not stand up for. That's not a personal issue. That's a governance policy issue that we have to take up.
James Early, I want you to come back as soon as possible. Please promise me that.
I will promise you I'll come back on anything that I might be able to say something substantive about. I really,
Everything,
I,
everything, everything.
All
Look,
right.
look. Everybody's just, we're fascinated because you have given us wonderful context, important context for what we are looking at, not just in Venezuela and throughout the Caribbean basin, because the threat is not just to Venezuela, it's to the Caribbean, it's to,
Yes,
quite frankly, the black, brown, and the world of color where the resources are.
yes.
Uh, the threat is here, and we have got to talk about it, but we need to understand, as you are showing us, that this is a global struggle. And people, I will leave you with this. I think it was my father's 70th birthday. He became the first person in the history of the British Parliament, what's that, been around 1,000 years, to be honored by them. He was the first non British citizen to be
That's
honored by them for his birthday. And at the luncheon, there were people from the right and the left, people of color, white people, and the whites who were progressive said, when I saw him, the people of color who were conservative said, when I saw him run and run with integrity, it changed my life.
yes.
And thank you for this life changing conversation that you are giving us today, because we don't hear enough of you in corporate media, but this is independent media, and that's why you're here. Because
May I
help
say
us.
one last thing about
Yes,
your,
sir.
and just to close, your father once invited me to go to Colombia with him, and I won't go
Ah,
into details, but he said to me, I don't have a doctorate, but he always called me doctor.
that's right. That's
He
not,
said,
in the black community, that's not how
no,
it's
right.
phrased.
He said, Dr. Early, you know a lot of things, but I have something you don't have. And I said, what's that, Reverend Jackson? He said, organization. I leave that with your listeners. Organization.
Mm.
We must organize. And all these spontaneous movements and more in California, we need to connect, and
We
we
need
need
organization.
to through organization.
Every time you get to this part, but you said we need organization.
We need organization. As A. Philip Randolph said to us, at the banquet table of life, there are no reserved seats. You have to see what you want. You have to take what you can, and anything you can hold, and you don't have organization. Uh, and Father understood that the Rainbow Coalition, it was organization. It was connecting the multiple points of light who were responding to the same thing in different geographical, cultural, linguistic, gender, class ways, but they were connecting it in organization. We need organization more than ever, not just a spontaneous fight back, but a integrated, connected network of networks. And we need to hold our congressional officials accountable, not only in our own districts, but across districts, because the attack is coming against us, black and brown, and particularly women. That's objective data. It's not spec. You can see who they're coming after, but they're coming after the whole country. And so our white American fellow citizens, colleagues, and so forth, you are not exempt from this either. We are just the front door, but they're coming for the whole house, as Martin Luther King said, this burning house that we have, and we all have to put out the fire through organization.
James Early, everybody, the former Assistant Secretary for Education and Public Service at the Smithsonian. Great, great man who'll be back here in a few more days, I must say. Yes, I'm
Thank
going to
you.
do it. Let's talk
Thank
about our
you.
voting rights. Congressman Jonathan Jackson is coming up, along with many others, to talk about the SCOTUS decision that could completely undo the Voting Rights Act. Back with more in literally a minute on the Santita Jackson Show. Much love to you. Oh, may God bless you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Love you. Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.